Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that may be new to the channel, first of all, thank you very much for joining our awesome community. I hope that you get something out of this. I talk a lot about food shortages and getting prepared with food and getting more food than what you need so that you can maybe be in the position to help someone in their time of need because they didn't heed the warning. I know that a lot of preppers don't fall in line with that kind of thinking, but I do. I believe that we should be our brother's keepers in the times when they need us the most. However, not everyone needs to think like I do, right, ladies and gentlemen? That's the beautiful thing about freedom. Well, today I want to react to a video that's put out by the UN's World Food Program. With everything that you see going on right now, with countries wanting to shut down farms, wanting to cull hundreds of thousands of cows, wanting to get rid of ranch animals here in the United States of America, wanting to eliminate those animals that produce CO2 or methane, like we humans don't produce CO2 or methane, right, ladies and gentlemen? Something we've been doing since the beginning of time. I wanted to react to their video because the World Food Program is a branch of the United Nations, and I just want to allow you to see for yourselves and maybe provide a little bit of commentary here and there on how hypocritical this organization is. They tell you one thing in one hand, but in the other hand, they're doing something totally different that is going to end up causing pain, hardship, and death to those people around the world that they pretend to be helping. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't good people in these organizations. I believe they are, but they are non-governmental organizations, meaning that we did not elect them into power, and therefore they should have no power over us to dictate to any countries or any other organizations what they should be doing or they shouldn't be doing. So let's go ahead and get into this video. It's only about 7 or 8 minutes long, but you all know me. I'll have to cut in it now and then so that I don't get a copyright strike, number one. But I like to provide a little bit of commentary so that I can remind you of exactly how it is that they're being hypocritical in what they are saying.
The acceleration of already high food, fertilizer and fuel prices has triggered a global crisis that could drive millions more into extreme poverty, magnifying hunger and malnutrition, while threatening to raise the global humanitarian case.
I failed to mention in the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, that this video is about 10 months old. So this video came out, yes, that's 10 months ago, right? So remember that, because they'll be saying that next year, and when they say next year, they're meaning 2023.
Low to new highs and erase hard-won development gains.
Food pricing is our #1 problem right now as a result of all this perfect storm for 2022. But 2023, it very well will be a food availability problem.
Now, you all remember, if you've been following me for a while, that I told you last year that we were going to have a food shortage crisis, but because of prices, because people were going to be priced out of food. And we've seen that happen with people moving from Walmarts to the Dollar Tree or the dollar store and now to food banks, and they just can't afford to get food at the store anymore like they used to. And then what happens when the food banks run out of food, ladies and gentlemen? I said that eventually it would become a scarcity issue and not a money issue or inflation issue.
What's the one thing that we all have in common? It's food. We need it, we enjoy it, and it brings us together. But right now, accessing affordable and nutritious food is becoming more and more difficult around the world.
I just want to point this out. The one thing we all have in common, as they state here, is food, that we all need it, right? We all need it, we all enjoy it. And what better way to control a world population than to control the food, ladies and gentlemen?
We've found ourselves living in a global food crisis.
I apologize, but we are living in a global food crisis, but orchestrated and engineered by who? It's out in plain sight. If you cannot tell yourself legitimately that we are in a world food crisis and that it's going to get worse, and you are not preparing, then ladies and gentlemen, you will be one of those that suffer, unfortunately. You at least need to be preparing. Even if you think that we are in the best times ever, you should still be prepared.
millions upon millions of people. In fact, 345 million people today are suffering from hunger at a crisis level.
Since early 2022, we at WFP already warned that this would be a year of unprecedented hunger. The pandemic's economic consequences play a huge part in hunger rising to unprecedented levels. At the same time, climate shocks continue to destroy lives, crops, and livelihoods, and undermine people's ability to feed themselves.
I'm going to have to disagree with that. There was one country, and I believe it was Sweden, that during the health crisis, they did nothing. They allowed nature to take its course, and they fared very well, and their industries were not destroyed. There was one or two states here in the United States of America, I believe one of them is South Dakota, that did the same thing. They did absolutely nothing. They did not have any mandates of any kind or anything like that, and they fared just fine, ladies and gentlemen. Right? So remember, when they tell you that the reason that this or that is happening is because of the health crisis that occurred in the last couple of years, it's not because of the health crisis. It's because of the actions that the government took. Whatever government it is that you live in. If you live in a country or a state where the government didn't take all of these restrictive actions towards the people and mandated the hell out of everyday life, then I'm pretty sure that you fared pretty well. But the government is the reason why people are now living paycheck to paycheck more so than they did 2 or 3 years ago. I digress.
Meanwhile, conflict keeps waging war on everyday life. As the biggest driver of hunger, currently 60% of the world's hungry live in areas afflicted by violence. In Ukraine, the war has transformed what was the breadbasket of the world into a major humanitarian aid recipient. Before the war began, Ukraine produced enough food to feed 400 million people per year. But when the war started, Ukraine's food exports all but stopped, trapping corn and wheat inside the country.
You know what is really interesting is that our markets for exporting food are highly concentrated. What that means is that less than 10 countries export 80-90% of total exports of crops like wheat, corn, rice, soybean. So when any shock happens to one of these 10 countries or less, we see a disproportionate effect around the world.
It's likely you're already feeling the impact of the crisis, whether that's seeing higher food prices during your weekly shop or finding limited supplies in the supermarket.
Before the war in Ukraine started, prices of food commodities were already at a 10-year high.
Ladies and gentlemen, ask yourselves this question, and if you don't know the answer, do a little bit of research. You only have to go back 10 or 12 years, something like that. But why did the war in Ukraine start? Why did that war start? What led up to that war? What was the match that lit that firecracker? Right? And no, don't say, well, it's because Russia invaded. No, why? See, a lot of people don't ask why. And the reason is because they have to look back 10 years, 11, 12 years. Well, if you look back that far, you may be able to find an answer and understand why it started. So when they go back and say, well, when this started, when this war started, or when that war started, yes, it may be a fact that it was after that war started that we couldn't get the exports out of Ukraine, which is kind of like one of the breadbaskets of the world that we used to get. But why did it start, and who is at the bottom of it? Who was the one pulling the strings that made that war start?
Prices of fuel commodities were already at a 7-year high. And now on top of that, because of the war, things were not moving as they were supposed to out of the Black Sea. And this is troublesome, not only for the poor countries, but also for rich countries. Look at the United States, 8.5% inflation hasn't happened in decades. Look at UK, 10.1%. So if our advanced economies are suffering as they are, what to talk of poor net food and fuel importing countries?
And that's one of the things that many people don't realize, is that here we are insulated from food scarcity as long as you have money to buy the food. And even if you don't have money to buy the food, you still have other organizations that can help you out. Usually you go to family, then church, than community, i.e. food banks, etc. And if you can't get help all the way that you need from those sources, then you are always able to go to the state and get food from the state as well. So we are pretty well insulated in first world nations, but those other poorer nations, they're the ones that are really going to starve, ladies and gentlemen, but then it's going to shift over to Western nations as well. Take a look at the video that I put out yesterday talking about the Deagle forecast for 2025, and one of the top 3 nations that's going to get hit the most with population reduction is here in the United States of America. At least that's what they forecasted on Deagle. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so eventually it will hit these top Western nations as well.
When it comes to the world's most vulnerable, the cost of the global food crisis will be counted in lives lost.
Almost every country in the Middle East and North Africa region have been hard hit by the war in Ukraine. This is a region that's highly dependent on food imports, and especially on the imports of grain from Ukraine and from Russia. 30% and more of the grain that comes to this region comes from Ukraine and Russia because of the geographical proximity. There are many countries in the region who have had a big burden in terms of food prices because of the conflict in Ukraine.
Even before the global food crisis, some families were already living on the edge.
ما كانت تصرفني هيك أبدا. كنت أعمل مكبوس، كنت أعمل زيتون، كانت الأسعار معقولة يعني. الوضع أسوأ لأنه الأسعار كل ما عم ترتفع. يعني ربطة الخبز اللي هي ربطة خبز الشيء الأساسي بالبيت سعرها تغير. هلا كتير شغلات نحن حارمين حالنا منها، مثلا الفواكه ممنوعة، تفتحي بالرادي فاضي مصفر. هلا غليجي الصغير من المدرسة نتغدى وراحت للمسا ليجي بيو من الشغل لحتى نتعشى. وجبتين بنها.
I hope you're paying attention to this, ladies and gentlemen, especially those of you that live in Western nations, first world nations, i.e., because this is what they want for Western nations, is to be equal with the standard of living with the rest of the world. You see, the big plan of globalization is world equality, right, ladies and gentlemen? Which means that those countries that are in the very bottom, they may come up just a little bit, but those countries that are in the top, first world nations, Western nations, they're going to have to go down a whole bunch in order to meet up with the countries that are in the bottom. So countries in Western nations, i.e. the U.S. being one of them, you get ready to see your standard of living drop by 50 to 75% in the next several years. But there is hope. You know why? Because we are in a fourth turning, and eventually we will turn over into a new cycle of spring, which means that things are going to be good. We're just going to have to be able to make it through these hard few years that we have ahead of us.
The global food crisis we're facing is being worsened by the energy crisis and the fertilizer crisis that are also occurring, leaving millions of people at risk of hunger and unable to afford a basic meal.
What we don't want for sure is that today's affordability crisis turns into or becomes tomorrow's availability crisis. What I mean by that is that today, if you have money, you can buy food. But if you don't sort out a few things right now, tomorrow, even if you have money, it won't be enough to buy food. What are those things to sort out? We need to make sure that the next agricultural season is a good one. That requires agricultural inputs.
We need to make sure that our next agricultural season is a good one. What are governments doing right now? They're trying to destroy agriculture. They're trying to destroy the rearing of animals that we humans use to consume for protein and fats. When you have an organization saying, hey, this is what we need to do, and they are experts at this, they know what they're talking about, but then you have another organization that is colluding with countries so that they can do the opposite of what it takes in order to feed people and keep people from not starving to death.
Especially fertilizer. And if that doesn't happen, our affordability crisis, which is bad enough as we can see around the world, turns into an availability crisis, meaning that food will be even less affordable for millions upon millions of people around the world. When WFP is setting records. That doesn't sound great for the world. In 2020, we assisted about 116 million people. In 2021, we assisted about 128 million people. That's the highest in our 60-year history. And guess what? This year, we're planning to assist between 140 to 150 million people. But in order for that to happen, WFP needs funding because we are voluntarily funded. And two, we always need access. And when we have both of them, we can do the job.
Right now, WFP's response focuses on three key things: providing emergency food and cash assistance and nutrition support to prevent millions from dying of hunger, supporting national social protection systems, and strengthening food systems.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and leave it at that. There's only about a minute or so left. I'm going to leave the link to this video on a pinned comment so that if you want to revisit it and watch it as many times as you want, you can do so. They are saying what it is that they need in order for people not to go hungry. Let me go ahead and put in my quick 2 cents on this. They don't need to do all the stuff that they're saying. Oh, we need money donated. We need this. We need that. You know what governments need to do in order for people not to go hungry? Just get the hell out of the way. Stop passing stupid-ass regulations. Stop getting in the way of progress. Stop telling farmers that they can't farm because nitrogen. Stop making wars around the world that will impede in people being able to get food from here or from there or anywhere. And people can live in harmony and in peace. Imagine that. My daughter's 16 years old, going on 17. She's lived in a world that's been at war her entire life. At one time or another, there's a war going on that the United States is actively involved in. They may not call it a war, but that's what it is. Having said that, again, I hope you get something out of this. I hope that you're preparing. I hope that you're preparing because the food program over here, who's a branch of the United Nations, is not going along with what all of the other countries that are part of the United Nations are doing. They're saying we need to do this, but all these other countries are saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do this instead. So all of these other countries are for sure going to make sure that the World Food Program stays in business. Have a great day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining in. God bless every one of you. God bless America. Don't stop prepping. I'm Alaska Prepper. I'm out.